So I already did an introduction video briefly explaining who am I, some of my concerns, some of my beliefs. This is my who am I video. So, who am I? I'm Nate Richardson, and this is my story. My story began in March of 1997 in a small hospital in Renton, Washington State. And I spent the first 5 years of my life growing up in a small town. At the time, it was a small town in Covington, Washington. Small town in a little bit of the backwoods. And I'm the oldest of my family. I'm the only son. I had two younger sisters, soon to follow in the following years. So I had a sister born a year later, and another sister born 2 years later. So family of five, a loving mother, a loving father, myself, and two younger sisters. We grew up in a Christian household. We'd go to church every Sunday, and I make this joke a lot, but there's a lot of truth behind it. We grew up in your cliche Christian white family. And my dad, he worked for an aerospace company. He would work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and I think one of my favorite things to do was to ask him, even if I already knew the answer, was to ask him, whether it was a weekday or a weekend, Dad, are you going to be here when I wake up in the morning? Most often it was no, it's Monday through Friday. That's how work works, you know? But come the weekends, I'd be excited. Oh my gosh, Dad's here for Saturday, he's here for Sunday. And I had a pretty good childhood as a kid. Saturdays was cartoons with my dad and waffles in the morning. And then Sunday was usually church with the entire family. It was very beautiful. Around the time I turned 5 or 6, we moved to a little bit of a bigger town, Auburn, Washington. It was maybe about a 10, 15-minute drive due south, a little bit of a bigger town. We ended up being the original owners of a house in Lakeland Hills. Really big community, lots of houses, and at the time there would be a forest nearby, and I would think, in my youth that nope, this is as big as it's gonna get. There's already a bajillion houses here, but the older I got, as time moved on, eventually that forest went away and more houses got built. Last I was in Washington, which was actually just a few months ago, they're still cutting down forests and they're still expanding. They've gone quite a ways. I do wonder when they're going to stop, because eventually they're going to reach the back roads where people got farms out there, they got their own land, and beyond that you got the Cascade Mountain Range. But so I grew up in Washington. The first 2-3 years I went to a Christian school. Now I will say it was probably one of the more worst times going to school. They were very strict, very, very strict, and I would later I pretty much knew from the get-go. Reading was very hard for me. And for those of you who are going to stay very consistent with this channel, keep that in mind, because it will affect me later on, the more stories I tell and how my lack of understanding when it comes to reading plays into my life. it's not so much reading as it is reading comprehension, but we'll talk about that in other videos. So eventually, I went to a school that was just brand new open. At this point, I was in fourth grade. We went to Lakeland Hills Elementary, and it was very weird. It was very weird because I was used to being in a Christian school. I was used to praying before eating lunch, like at the Christian school. We'd all get our food, and when everyone had their food, we'd all say grace. And the fact that that didn't happen anymore was very weird. And I started meeting different individuals that were not walks of Christ. And I actually remember one of my more favorite students was actually Muslim, and she was from Iraq, and she was really sweet. Back when I was in fourth grade, she wasn't in. I didn't see her in fifth grade, and I probably didn't see it at the time, but I can't help but feel that something happened, probably in the form of being exported or sent back to Iraq, but I'll never know. But I did 2 years of public school for elementary school. Now, by the time I graduated fifth grade, it was 2008, and my dad showed up for my fifth grade graduation. Now, there are some schools out there I know where you go grades 1 to 8 and there's no ceremony from elementary school and middle school. Or some schools, like the 6th grades in elementary school and then 7th grades in middle school. For me, the end of elementary school was the 5th grade and the beginning of middle school was the 6th grade. And I was very happy when my father showed up to pick me up from my last day of school. This was the year 2008. Now, for those of you who know, there was a little bit of a recession in our country. A lot of people lost their jobs, and unfortunately my dad was one of them. This would have a really big impact for the rest of my childhood. But before I continue talking about school, the recession, and my teenage years, some of the things that I used to do before the invention of touchscreen cell phones, believe it or not, before the invention of the iPod, I would have a big group of friends, guy friends. There was maybe 8 of us back. This was probably the last years when kids would really go out and actually go out and play with their neighbors, the neighbors' kids. And we would pester our parents, oh, buy us Nerf guns. And we'd have these big Nerf battles. And we would go all across, all around the neighborhood, shooting darts at each other. And then come middle school, we upped it up to... I wasn't expecting to get a phone call during the middle of this. That was very weird. Anyway, my apologies, audience. But yes, eventually come middle school, we upgraded to airsoft guns, but these weren't like the professional airsoft guns. These were like the see-through ones. These were like the semis where every time you'd shoot, you'd have to, cock your gun again, load another pellet in. Eventually the neighbors got very pissed because they... find a lot of pellets in their yards. Their cars entered. Kids will be kids, but eventually that only lasted about 2 years, unfortunately. And then I also got into Legos. So Nerf and Legos were a really big thing when I was growing up. We even had a neighborhood Lego club. My parents probably put about a good $1,000 into getting me Legos. Back when Legos were cheap, at least, I will say that. And Dad would take me to like some Lego convention in Puyallup, Washington. But moving on from all of that, Middle school is where things kind of got weird. I was very excited when my dad was home. Every day. He was home every day. For 6 months, but I can tell the face, his face expressions, his mood. There was a lot of concern. There was a lot of worry, and I was too young to understand, what this all meant. I was just happy that dad was home. Um, it was also around this time where video games started to get a little bit more popular in my life. I started getting into computer games. I think the biggest computer game that stuck out, even still to this day, is an old game that was made back in 2003, Rise of Nations, Thrones and Patriots. The original Rise of Nations was fun. Thrones and Patriots made it a little bit better with the ability to move your capital around. For those of you who know the game, you can move the capital around, and you can even select your own government. And keep that one in mind. And I'll talk about that in real briefly. But my dad ended up working 3 jobs. I think he ended up working 1 aerospace job and 2 wine jobs. Now, he's got a hobby. His hobby is wine. He's into wine. No big deal if, that's your hobby, the different kinds of wines that you're interested in and how it's made and the taste. But eventually it did work its way into consuming. He never got drunk, but you could definitely tell he'd come home from work and there'd always be a bottle in his hand, and he always seemed agitated. I guess, according to my parents, this was the rockiest time of the marriage, and I guess, and I didn't know this until I left the house, but I guess divorce was very, very much possible, which would have been very, very devastating. Looking at the divorce rate these days, and who initiates it and the reasons why, it's just ridiculous. But for my parents to do that would have been unimaginable. Eventually things got worked out. I think my dad started drinking less. This was mostly during middle school. This was 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. I think 8th grade being probably the most chaotic. Eventually my dad did start drinking less, or at the very least just resorted to drinking beer, which lower alcohol content, I guess, but it's a step, I guess. But yeah, he worked 3 jobs, 2 of which were involved in wine. My relationship with my mother was very either super great or super crappy. And this is just, middle school. We're all going through puberty. We're all trying to find ourselves. This is the rebellion era of our age. And my mom was my best friend and still is to this day. And just, I'd always go to her for advice. She was more around than my dad was. Not that dad was gone getting cigarettes or milk, but he was working all the time. And eventually my mom started working too, but she worked during the day and was home by 3 o'clock, whereas dad, he wouldn't get home till 7 or 8. But again, I was going through my rebellion phase where she would tell me to do something, I would say no. As teenagers, I can't help but feel, especially American teenagers, we all go through this some way, shape, or form. Kids eventually want a little bit more independence around this age. I would take annual trips with my parents to Arizona. My grandparents had a timeshare in Scottsdale, Arizona. And at the time, I fell in love with the desert. I fell in love with the cactus. I fell in love with Phoenix. I fell in love with Arizona. It was super trippy when I found out that Arizona had forests much like Washington did, looking at Grand Canyon and Flagstaff. But I fell in love with Arizona, and I always told myself as a kid that I would move there. Keep that in mind for future videos. And my other grandparents, they had a cabin that my grandma lived in since, oh God, 1910. It's still in Minnesota. It's just outside of Shaska. And I could, never care. I honestly could care less about Minnesota as a kid. I was a sucker for Arizona. But um, as an adult, it's funny how Minnesota and Arizona actually swapped for reasons that I'll get into real briefly. But moving on. So anyway, middle school was weird. Video games became a little bit more prevalent in my life. The Xbox 360 came out. I got the Xbox 360, 2 years after it came out. Halo Reach was big. Halo 3 was big. Modern Warfare 3 came out. That was great. This is the time though where even though those neighborhood kids were still around, we stopped playing. We were done with Legos. We were done with Nerf. We were done with Airsoft. And for those who were still into Airsoft, they went more into the more expensive Airsoft guns, LARPing, knockoff gear and equipment, to make it look more authentic. But long gone were the days of the see-through Airsoft guns. And then eventually some kids did move in high school, which was very sad. It was also around this time I met a girl in choir. I was in choir for quite a few years. I wasn't in choir in high school, but I met a girl. Beautiful redhead Russian. Her father moved here from the Soviet Union when he was a kid. I believe it was in the 80s, 10 years before the Soviet Union fell. And she's a very beautiful woman. And I tried very hard to get with her, go on dates. I did actually secure one date, but it never went everywhere. It didn't go anywhere after that. But we did become Facebook friends, and I did get her phone number, and I got very excited when she did text me. It was probably one of those situations where she thought we were friends, but deep down inside I had a romantic passion for her. I should probably also mention that in both middle school and high school, I had very long hair. I identified as a nerd. And Rise of Nations, going back to Rise of Nations real quick, the whole choosing your governments, I knew what a democracy was. I knew what a despot was. I didn't know. And I knew what a monarchy was. I didn't know what capitalism was. And I didn't know what socialism was, which eventually led to me researching not only just communism, but just politics in general. And going into high school, I identified as a nerd with long hair, bad acne, braces, and I identified as a communist. Now, I identified as a communist for two reasons. The first reason is because every time I thought of communism, I thought of the Soviet Union and, oh, they're such a big, powerful military. Oh, look how well they're marching. Look at their tanks. Look at their planes. Oh my God, I'm into military stuff. The second reason was when I learned about how communism is supposed to divide the wealth amongst the people. I thought of my dad. I thought how my dad was working 3 jobs. We were struggling to pay bills. We had to sell a car. And how there were rich people out there who weren't affected by the recession. And how, at the time, I thought these rich people, they need to help people like my dad. They need to help the middle class. There's a reason why I don't believe in this stuff anymore in future videos, which I'll explain about, but to give you an idea of who I was in high school. Long hair, acne, braces. Big history nerd. Holy crap, I was a history nerd. I lost most of that now, but I was really big into history. And a communist. Think of the most cliche communist liberal today, and that's what I looked like. And I was, 14 years old? And I was like this up until about 11th grade, and then I just decided that politics were just too much drama. But it was also around this time that I stopped also believing in God. I felt that it was stupid. I thought religion was stupid. That people go, whether if you're a Christian, Muslim, Jewish, whatever, the concept of going to a building to give your time and mental belief, spiritual belief, into a figure that we haven't seen in thousands of years was stupid. And it was like that for maybe about 4 or 5 years. Now, it wasn't until I got my first girlfriend at the age of 19. She was Christian, and I renewed my faith with God, and I realized that, growing up, I was a Christian because my parents were Christian, and I had to go with them to church. But now it's more of a personal choice. But I also choose to believe in what I believe in when I read the Bible or when I go to sermons. I'll go more into depth about my belief with God and Christ, specifically the Christian God, and Jesus Christ in a future video. And I hope that's something I can share with you all. But it was by this time I graduated high school in 2016. I worked a month at Keurig, and that was interesting because I worked from 5 in the afternoon to 5 in the morning during the summertime. And not only was the warehouse hot, but it was just really weird to be working when the sun was up, setting, and then by the time I got off work, the sun rose. It was also by this time my grandparents gave me their hand-me-down car, a 2004 Honda CR-V. I loved it. I loved it a lot, and that's basically what they gave me for not really so much like a high school present, but just kind of a, hey, you can drive, and here's your car. Cool, thanks. So I used that for work. It was also around this time my sisters were, they were also driving, and it was very frustrating, even though I was the one out of school making money. It was very frustrating when they used the car, left the tank on empty, and I was always paying for gas. That was a hard one. They're not working, but they keep using the gas that I keep paying for. So anyway, I did eventually quit that job, and I worked for another job called Expeditors. That was probably one of the easiest jobs I ever worked, because that job was literally stacking boxes inside trucking containers. And these boxes would go out to various cities across the United States, and they would end up in Ross, TJ Maxx, Macy's. These boxes were interesting. They would say where they come from. They came from all over the world: Italy, Vietnam, China, just to name a few places. Eventually, it was at this time I did meet my girlfriend. It was an online relationship, and I'll talk more about it in a future video. The family was very, very conservative. But I went down to, they lived in Arizona, which was a complete win, and they didn't live too far from where my grandparents lived. So it was really great to be back. My grandparents eventually did sell their timeshare when I got into high school. So I used my own money to fly down to Arizona. It was a nice family on the technicality that they let me stay with them and feed me. But other than that, they were very concerning people, which again I'll talk about in the future. But the actual daughter, or my girlfriend at the time, was actually was actually sweet. She was a little bit more mentally sane than everyone else. And then this was also the time where I decided that I wanted to join the United States military. I did try to join the Marine Corps back in 10th grade. Now, I obviously wouldn't have joined in 10th grade, but I would have begun the process. There's a program that the Marine Corps has for high school students. I can't remember it at the top of my head, but let's just say things with the Marine Corps got really weird. It kind of scared me away from them. There's a little bit of an irony. I had two grandparents, two grandfathers who were in the Marine Corps, and I remember one day I got home from school and my mom was crying like, "Don't join the Marine Corps, they're tough, rugged, blah, 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 blah." I didn't believe in that stuff, but when she kind of got on about like, "Oh, you're going to go into combat zones and die," that, on top of how weird my recruiters were, on top of my mom being upset about that kind of stuff, some of the stuff she said was like, whatever. The other kind of stuff was like, yeah, you're right. I could go in a combat zone. So I eventually joined the Air Force. I wanted to join as a TAC P, but didn't score high enough on the ASVAB, which I don't want to talk about. But I took electronics in high school, and I did really good. And electronics was on a list. I was presented a list of 6 jobs, and I put electronics as number 1. Number 2 was HVAC. Number 3 was also HVAC, but a different kind of HVAC. Number 4 was firefighting. Number 5 and 6 was cook and pest control. And I was like, if I get 5 or 6, I'm not joining. I'm just going to wait until a better job presents itself. So now it is Christmas Day. Excuse me, it's 2 days before Christmas of 2016. I get a call from the recruiter. "Hey, you're leaving in March, and you're going to be a firefighter." Okay, well, when I think of the Air Force, I think of aircraft. When I think of firefighting, I think of firefighting. Put the 2 together, aircraft firefighting. Why was I wrong? My parents were very happy for me. It was kind of a bittersweet. On one hand, I think my rebellious stage was still going strong at this point, and it was kind of a haha, screw you, I finally get to leave the house. But at the same time, it was kind of like, oh crap, I'm leaving the house. And I don't really know what I'm getting myself into. Boot camp was hard for me on the technicality that no one really taught me good work ethic. Also, apparently people don't like excuses. So that was a very tough learning curve for me at the time, unfortunately. Eventually I did pass boot camp, and I did go to tech school. The girlfriend that I had in Arizona broke up with me over the phone graduation day. I've never really been through a breakup before, so when I was emotional around my parents, they were thinking, oh, he's finally done with boot camp. He's so proud of himself, and really, I was just upset that I lost my first girlfriend. But I don't think they know that. I don't know if they do or don't. But my tech school was in San Angelo, Texas. It is kind of it's not a small town, but it ain't a large town in the middle of Texas, surrounded by a lot of nothing. I think the nearest city next to San Angelo is like Abilene. And I went there during the summertime, so it was very nice to, go there during 4th of July. The weather was nice for the most part. We did get a little bit of, I guess, I'm trying to remember, a hurricane hit Houston, and we got a little bit of the rain from that. And because it was so dry there, the whole base would flood. It was wild. Um, Also, for Fire Academy, we have a thing called Hell Week where you do a lot of hose deployments, hose movement, uh, live burns. It's propane burns though, and the hottest week of the year was the week that I was doing that. So every day I would go home drenched in sweat, which was very uncomfortable. 3 mile runs every day, if not every other day. I think they staggered it between like doing push-ups and then the next day doing a bunch of running, which for our job was very important. The Intel people, it's also a joint base where not only is it a fire academy, it's also an Intel building, or an Intel base. So it's kind of funny because you got the firefighter jocks who work out a lot. We're out in the sun, the hot Texas sun, fighting fire, and then you got the Intel people who are essentially really smart nerds in air-conditioned bunkers. Those were some of the most entitled people I've ever met. Oh my gosh. Also, some of the nerdiest. I thought my high school friends were nerds, but Air Force Intel people are pretty nerdy. I think there was maybe one Intel person that was like ripped and shredded, and I was like, "Why are you not a firefighter?" um, yeah, we actually have special forces. I think they'd just be like on base, and they'd just be doing PT with us. They wouldn't do it with the Intel people because they don't. The Intel people didn't do PT. The fire guys did, so they do PT with us, which was cool. Um, I did get my second girlfriend in tech school. It was very toxic. It didn't last very long. It lasted a month and a half. She snuck me all the way to Houston though, so that was nice. And she introduced me to Waffle House. I love Waffle House. I wish there was like more Waffle Houses like westward, but apparently they're mostly in the south. So, oh well. I think she also introduced me to Whataburger. I love Whataburger. I love those avocado sandwiches. Um, anyway, that relationship only lasted a month and a half, and it wasn't long until I got my third girlfriend, which uh, we'll talk about in a different video. In fact, every girlfriend's gonna get their own video. Lucky bastards. That girlfriend uh, stayed in a relationship with me when I got to my first duty station, which was ironically only 4 hours up the road from San Angelo in a small town in the middle of nowhere called Altus, Oklahoma. I never thought I would live in Oklahoma, let alone go there. But there I was. Small town Oklahoma. Um, I'm going to end the video here. I think it's very important that I talk about my military experience in a separate video. We're already at 33 minutes in this video. And the more that I think about it, this was supposed to be more of who I am, who I was in my childhood years. There will be more stories in my childhood that we'll talk about in the future, but for now, I'll end it here, and the next video will be who I am between my first duty station and now. Thank y'all for watching.